My entitled mom demands that I change the name of my baby as she absolutely hates it, claiming that my wife and her family have twisted my sense of obligation to family tradition by picking a name that's outside of what she would approve of. Here's what happened. My wife and I are both in our late 20s, and we had our first child together in June. Before he was born, there was a lot of talk about names from different family members on both sides, but the pressure by far was definitely on my side specifically. We didn't tell a soul what the name would be until our son was born and we had left the hospital. And needless to say, my parents were disappointed when we announced our son's name. My family is very traditional in how they named us. We were each named after grandparents, and that's how they feel everyone should name their kids. My wife's family doesn't have a tradition when it comes to naming babies. They just name them and then go along. There's no fuss or insisting on certain names. But my wife's side tends to favor more uncommon and unusual names. And honestly, my wife and I's taste tends to lean a little bit more to her side than to mine, which is how we ended up picking the name that we chose for our son. This was not something my parents liked because they expected our son to be either Jack, which is my dad, or Parker, who is my father-in-law. But I know they were expecting a little Jack to be born, so that added to their reaction. So they quizzed us on our choice to break tradition, and I told them it wasn't a tradition my wife's family used, and we decided we weren't going to have one either. Over the last couple of months, both parents have questioned why we did this, and have wanted to discuss other names for future babies. And my mom has been the worst by far. She asked why we went with something so unlike the names we have in our own family, and I told her our family wasn't the only family involved, but that we also didn't take the family's taste into account. We just went with what we liked. She then pointed out that our taste was a lot more like my in-laws, and I said yes, but that it wasn't about my in-laws and their taste. It was about what my wife and I wanted. I told her I was done discussing it, and ever since that point, I now change the topic or end the conversation when she brings it up, or refuses to let it go. We had a little naming ceremony on Saturday, and my mom decided that she was going to dig in her heels about the name, and she straight up told me that we picked a stupid name and that she hated it. She then said something that honestly blew my mind. She demanded that we change it into something like Jack or Parker. She told me that we had no business breaking a long-held family tradition, and that there's a reason those traditions are in place so that foolish people can't name their babies the worst names imaginable. She also said that my in-laws must be so smug, thinking that they will have at least 2 stupidly named grandkids, just like they have with all their other stupidly named kids. And when she said that, I lost my temper. I told her to shut up, and we're not naming our kids like she and dad named me and my siblings, and I told her that she would need to leave and learn to be more respectful because I would not take those insults against my wife or her family lying down. Well, my mom hated being told to shut up, and she said that I had no excuse for rudeness to her face, but I think the way she was acting was crazy. So am I the jerk in this situation? What should I do? Wow, your parents are super obsessed about what you're naming your own kid. Like seriously, who are they to say what you can and cannot name your child? For starters, in my opinion, I think traditions like this are really dumb, and it's mostly just annoying for people who are like, okay, I want to name my kid something other than Jack or Parker, which by the way, those are like totally fine names, but I would rather give that name to a kid if I really wanted to give it to them, instead of feeling obligated by my weird controlling parents, which this is all this is, by the way. They're trying to act like they have some kind of like hold over the family and what you can and can't do, but in reality, they have no say in the matter. And the fact that she's attacking your wife and her family and trying to be like, wow, this is their fault. They must be so smug for all the dumb names they're giving out. Like that to me is perfect evidence that they have sour grapes about the whole situation, and I'm willing to bet that it all goes back to the fact that they have literally no say in your life any longer. So honestly, I don't think you're the jerk at all, and I know if I was in your shoes, I would have done the exact same thing. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. I'm tired of dealing with entitled parents at my job because they make my life as a receptionist at a hotel an absolute nightmare. Here's what happened. I'm a 31-year-old female and I work as a receptionist in a hotel in a small town on the Italian coast. I've been doing this job for 4 years and never before have we had to endure the arrogance of entitled parents like this year. When booking the stay, we make it clear right away that check-in is not even possible before 2:30 p.m. And that's because the hotel where I work at has about 70 rooms and we are constantly full. So the housekeeping staff needs a bit of time to clean the rooms, considering that checkout is by 11 in the morning. Our housekeeping staff is amazing. They're fast and efficient, but they still need a few hours to clean 70 plus rooms. Well, this year there have been dozens, and I mean dozens of instances where guests have shown up at about 7 o'clock in the morning, demanding that we give them their room early because they'll say to us, "Oh, we have small children who suffer in the heat." And on several occasions, some of these arrogant jerks even suggested that we go and kick previous guests out of the bed literally at 7 o'clock in the morning just to make it work for them and their stupid spawn. And how does one even think about suggesting such a thing? Were they raised by wolves? Aren't they disgusted with themselves to even suggest such a thing? I mean, what is up with these people and their massive narcissism? Also, these entitled jerks scream all the time about how their small children can't withstand the heat and that they need their rooms immediately, as if their poor planning is my concern. And then I see them dragging their newborn babies to the beach at noon sharp, all under the hot, blazing sun at nearly 40 degrees Celsius. Like, are you actually concerned about the safety of your kid or not? And is it really necessary to have a beach holiday in August during a heat wave with such a small child and even worse planning? I am so sick of these people. They firmly believe that parenthood gives them a pass to be horrible to everybody and have special privileges everywhere they go. And I think that entitled parents are truly making the world a horrible place to live in the first place. Yeah, that kind of behavior is super toxic, and I don't blame you for getting frustrated. I can only imagine dealing with people on a daily basis, especially in a hotel off the Italian coast. Like, that has seriously got to be an absolute nightmare to put up with. And I just love the point that the original poster makes, because these entitled parents' poor planning is really at fault here and not the hotel itself. Like, they need time to clean the rooms up. They can't just give you a sloppy room and be like, "Okay, here you go," because then the opposite will happen and they'll just complain and be like, "Wow, you didn't even clean our rooms." And it's like, yeah, of course, because you demanded it right away. So truly, I have to agree with the original poster, because I also think that entitled parents make this world just a little bit worse. My entitled grandma tries to move in with me and my family after she falls on hard times. And despite the fact that she mistreated my dad his entire childhood, my parents took the firm stance that she will not be moving in with us. Here's what happened. To start things out, I knew my grandparents told my dad to move out when he was young, but the version my dad told me was that this happened when he finished high school and applied for a job. But in reality, the real version is way worse. My grandmother married young and had my dad 6 months after the wedding. Back then, when you were expecting, you married after parents of both parties made a deal. So this is what happened here. When my dad was born, his father went to a party because he had a son. And when my dad was 6 days old, there was an accident. His dad was on a bike and there was an accident with the truck, with only the truck driver surviving. There was no insurance because my grandfather was very drunk. So the situation for my grandmother was not easy. There was no job, no money, and she had an infant. When my dad was 7, his grandparents arranged a marriage for their daughter. My step-grandfather was scared of being a father as a young adult, but did whatever possible with his limited resources. And my grandmother got odd jobs, became an alcoholic, and then got fired. And it happened so many times that later they decided she was to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of her kids, which basically made my dad as a replacement parent for his step-siblings. Now, here is where it gets really bad. When my dad was 16 years old and in high school, he wasn't a bad student, but his younger brothers and sisters were bad students. One of his younger brothers wasn't promoted to the next class in elementary school, and my grandmother got mad and forced my dad out. She said to him to take your clothes and get out, and she would scream at him, "We will see how long you stay in high school now." Back then, there were laws that kids were to stay in school until they were 18, and it was illegal to hire a minor. So my dad got some odd jobs, and the parents of his schoolmates let him stay for several weeks, and one of his teachers ended up letting him stay. He then got a lawyer to check and see if emancipation was allowed in this case, but my grandmother went to court and lied that she never forced him out and that he was just a bad son. He was always drinking, he had bad grades, he was always playing around and beating his siblings, and so on. And despite having his school records and somehow records of his siblings, he still did not have any options with emancipation. The judge was in a position to force my grandmother to take my dad in, but refused. My step-grandfather promised and delivered money every month, and he was a better parent than my grandmother ever was. My dad finished up with high school, and there was talk about university, but then he got a job. He found a place to stay, and then he met my mom. And after the wedding, they first lived with my grandparents, and supposedly, many times strangers would arrive at the house and ask for money that my relatives were supposed to pay. But thankfully, all of this ended when my parents got their own place. Several years go by of no contact, and then eventually my stepfather passed away. They owned a flat that my grandmother inherited, and there was no mortgage. Also, she had no retirement money because she mostly didn't work, but according to our lawyer, she had about 80% of her husband's retirement money, so it was all set. She then contacted my dad once to tell him that he would never get the flat or his stepfather's money. Fast forward several more years later, and suddenly a clerk from a hospital calls. My grandmother had diabetes, and she never got treated for it, and she just kept on drinking. And more to the point, she had money for vodka but not for utilities or rent. She would get many notifications and then ignore them and then just drink some more. At a certain point, she was so far into debt that it was more than the value of her flat, so she lost it. And she then tried to say that her good kids had money for vodka but not for their mom. Now, her only daughter was married and wanted to take out a credit, bail my grandmother out, and get that flat for her own kids. But my grandmother didn't sign a contract for that flat. She said, "Just give me money and I will pay my debts." So my uncle blocked the transaction. He wanted to help and pay, but not give money when my grandmother takes all and promises to pay. So she lost that flat and some friends took her in. She badmouthed my dad and her daughter and her son-in-law. Then one friend saw her real character and asked another person to take her in, and so on and so forth. Now, when my grandma actually found someone to properly stay with, she would be there with some of her sons and they were drinking and a lot of valuable items would be missing. Now, the person that she had stolen all this stuff from would say nothing because it was one person against several drunk people, but then just decided to wait, and when the sons went away, they called paramedics for an elderly lady with diabetes. She wasn't lucid and they weren't sure if it was diabetes or the alcohol. Eventually, the cops arrived and they actually tried to blame the friend for all of this going down in their house, but they had a recording of themselves begging the sons not to share alcohol with my grandmother, so the cops couldn't arrest the host, and instead the paramedics took my grandmother to the hospital. And as a result, she lost both of her legs. The hospital kept her for several weeks, and she gave my parents' address as her own, thus eventually leading to this hospital clerk calling my parents. They had to show all the documents and explain my grandmother herself went no contact, took credits from my dad, kept money that he had to pay back, and took a home her parents left him, and a lot more. Now, the hospital couldn't demand that my parents accept her, and actually my dad wanted to, but my mom put her foot down. She asked, "What will you do when your mom invites your brothers and one of them is so drunk that he hurts me or your daughter?" Well, as you can probably guess, none of the good sons took her in. The hospital clerk tried to put her in a home for elderly people, but it just didn't work. There was a rule that demanded no alcohol, which she absolutely disregarded. She invited her sons, they had vodka, and some more items went missing from many rooms, so I'm sure you can see why this is just not a good combination. Eventually, her daughter took her in, and they moved to another place, and they went to live with the son-in-law's parents. But the good thing is that it was 180 kilometers from our city, so there was hope that all the stepbrothers of my dad wouldn't visit. I mean, they had no jobs, some money from Adult Protective Services, which they literally just used for vodka, and while they would promise a lot, they never visited and they just never got around to it. Now, I know my parents visited several times, and they left some money for my uncle, who used it to buy some medical supplies or to hire a nurse, because he said that if he gave it to my aunt, she would give the money to her mother, who would then use it to drink. Eventually, my grandmother passed away there and was buried locally. All of the sons that would basically party with her went to her funeral, and they started a huge fight. They demanded money from my parents and my aunt and uncle, and it's all just such a huge mess. But honestly, overall, I'm so blown away by the way my grandmother treated my dad, as well as the awful life that she decided to live. Wow, your grandma absolutely sounds like a piece of garbage. She treated your dad like crap, like literally most of his life, and then at her lowest point, after doing so much damage, she tried to basically forward all of her medical problems and bills and all this other stuff over to your parents for them to take care of. And it's like, wow, isn't that ironic? The grandma treats her son like crap pretty much his entire life, but then suddenly when the shoe's on the other foot, she's definitely in some kind of need. So hopefully you and your family can find peace in this entire situation, because what you described sounds truly awful. An entitled Karen screams at me after I snap at her kid for screaming in my ear. And despite the fact that this Karen basically allowed her kid to run around and scream like crazy, she still had the audacity to get in my face and scream at me, all because I corrected her stupid kid. Here's what happened. So this happened a few years ago at a major airport in the United States. I worked as a pilot for an airline, and in the course of my duties, I ride our aircraft to and from home to our crew base. I often did this out of uniform, with my only identifying feature being my work ID and my lanyard. My last flight before time off put us on the ground around noon, and being off duty, I immediately changed out of my uniform and I took a seat from the gate where my flight home would depart from. Behind me, there was a rambunctious child who was using the seat as her personal playground and would randomly squeal and scream while doing so. Now, while this is annoying, and the squeals are like nails on a chalkboard to me, it's the reality of things. So I just ignore it and I browse through my tablet. Well, the next thing I know, I catch a full scream into my ear. I turn my head back and the kid is literally a couple of centimeters from my face and is hanging off the back of my chair. Well, I immediately snapped at the kid. I said to her, "Do not scream into my ear." Well, that is when when the entitled Karen mother of the story, who was letting all of this happen, lose her mind. She darts up, standing over the seat behind me, yelling at me, saying, "Don't you dare yell at my kid, how dare you?" Meanwhile, the kid has a shocked look on her face, but settles down and goes silent. This entitled Karen goes on, trying to goad me into arguing with her, and doing everything but actually putting hands on me to escalate this into a physical fight. She even tries to encourage her kid to scream again, to which the kid just sat there quietly, and an initial stare at her for a few seconds, then went back to ignoring her and the situation, and just going back to looking at my tablet. She continues having a meltdown for about 10 minutes, before the man with her collected her, the kid, all of their things, and then went elsewhere. Now, I feel bad for the kid, as I cannot see her future ending well with this sort of guidance. It was also a shame that the mother flipped out, as I likely would have given the kid wings that my company supplies us after the kid had calmed down. But regardless, I'm honestly still in shock by the way this lady acted. Yeah, this is a classic case of if you don't discipline your kid, someone else definitely will, because this kid had no right to be screaming and jumping all over the place. Like, why would you let your kid just jump all over the place like that? I can understand if you let that happen at home and you're just like, whatever, do whatever you want. But if you're in public, in my opinion, it is your responsibility and yours only to discipline your kid and say, hey, you cannot act like that in public. And with enough practice, it really is possible to keep them under control. And sure, there's extenuating circumstances across the board that would be like, no, but what about this situation? But I really think that generally speaking, it absolutely is possible. So honestly, good for the original poster for putting this kid and this entitled Karen in their place. There is no reason you should have to put up with that kid literally screaming in your ear, because that is inappropriate and absolutely should not be tolerated. Am I the jerk for not letting my boyfriend grieve and for getting upset that he's not helping me in my day-to-day activities? Because right now I'm very frustrated and I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. Okay, for a bit of backstory, my boyfriend's grandfather passed away 4 days ago. When he passed, we met all of his family at a small emergency room to say our goodbyes, and the emergency room made everybody wear masks due to sickness going around the hospital. So 2 days ago, I started to feel really bad body aches and I had a sore throat. And keep in mind, I'm 18 weeks pregnant. I told him how I felt, and he basically said he doesn't want to get sick because his grandfather's funeral is coming up. Well, I told him I was feeling weak as well as hungry, and I didn't want to drive myself home and then be hungry once I got there. I asked him if he was okay with helping me for the night, and I'll just leave in the morning. Basically, just bring me some food to the room so I wouldn't contaminate any other areas of the house. He told me he had a lot on his mind and wasn't in the right headspace to help me out. So I told him I understand, and then I left. When I got home, I made something small to eat and then I went to sleep. And then yesterday morning, he calls in and checks on me. I tell him how I feel more sick than when I left, and he just says okay. The rest of the day, he has family over until about 3 o'clock in the morning, just offering their condolences and keeping his family company. Around 4 p.m., I called and asked him for help to see if he could bring me something to eat, because all I had the strength to get myself were just snacks like chips and cereal. No real meals, and I just wanted to make sure that I had enough in me for the baby. Well, he just basically brushed me off, saying he has no idea how he could help, and said I was selfish for not thinking about him grieving, and how he was stressed and had a million things on his mind. He also told me that I was being evil because I said he wasn't helping me at all. After that, I just hung up. He then called me at 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone left to sleep, and he was on the phone with me for maybe about 20 minutes, but then he hung up later and said he would call me back, but he didn't. Now I just don't want to speak to him at all, but I don't want to cause him more stress when he's already sad about his grandfather. So I want to know if I'm the jerk here for not respecting his time for grieving. Also, would I be the jerk for not talking to him today? I know how it feels to lose your grandfather when you're so close with him, but at the same time, I just asked for a little bit of help, and I don't feel like I was asking him for a lot. Most medications you can't take during pregnancy because they have had bad side effects for the fetus, so I've just been waiting it out, and he knows that as well. What should I do? Before we go any further, the original poster has an update for us. Here's what they had to say. Okay, so it's been decided that I'm the jerk here, and honestly, that is fine. But for the ones wondering about DoorDash and other options, I recently just paid my bills, and I made groceries for his place since I would be there with him during this time. So unfortunately, I cannot afford DoorDash at the moment, but that would have been my first option. I didn't bring any food with me because all of the groceries really have been cooked besides snacks, and also I know he is grieving, and I would have never said anything, but if he was okay enough to do favors for others yesterday, he could have picked up some food and left it at my doorstep. He didn't even have to come inside. Also, I have family and friends, but getting them to do things for me is a bit of a challenge, and I learned a while ago just to stop asking. It's really just been me and him caring for one another. But after reading some of your comments, I understand how I came off as needy. Also, I need to say that I do speak to my family every day and we are really close in that way. I see them every week as well, so there is no bad blood between us. Also, my friends don't live close to me where it's easy to just drop off food and go, but on the other hand, my parents do. But now that I'm an adult, and since my other siblings have had children, my parents tend to them. I have two siblings who aren't in their kids' lives at the moment due to their own faults, so my parents step in. When I ask for help where they have to physically do something for me, it's always with them saying like, oh, I'm too tired for this, or it's, oh, I just don't feel like doing that right now. But when they ask me, they feel like I'm just supposed to do whatever it is that they ask. So yeah, I never call on them first. I call on my boyfriend and we've been together for over 3 years. Okay, for starters, I absolutely think the original poster is the jerk, but also I just don't think they get it. Like literally, they've explained away and they've given an update of some kind, but I think they're completely missing the point. So let me try and spell it out. Your boyfriend is grieving the loss of a family member. He does not have time to wait on you hand and foot. Also, he's not going to be around you because he doesn't want to get sick. He wants to be there for the funeral and be there around his family right now especially. So for you to be like, wow, why couldn't you stop what you're doing and get me food? Or just even instigate the idea of giving him the silent treatment right now of all times? Like seriously, you are absolutely the jerk. And the fact that you're not seeing it, in my opinion, is such a shame, because I guarantee you if the shoe was on the other foot, you would be feeling a certain kind of way. So in my opinion, yes, you're absolutely the jerk, and I just don't think it's appropriate for anybody to act like that in the slightest. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.